Coming up next on the program, G. Neri will never forget the murder of a small boy in Chicago. Yummy Sandifer was 11 years old when he was killed. The teacher and author, G., decided that he'd try writing graphic novels designed to capture the attention of kids. And that story's next. I'm Dick Gordon from American Public Media. This is The Story. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story. The murder rate in Chicago has been climbing steadily. 400 people have been killed so far this year. The author, G. Neri's been watching the news about this. In fact, it was a murder in Chicago more than 15 years ago that set G. on his current path of writing graphic novels. The young man whose case he was watching was named Robert Yummy Sandifer. Yummy was 11 years old, and by all accounts he was running with a local gang called the Black Disciples. He killed a young girl that he grew up with, and then he himself was shot and killed. Apparently the gang had feared he'd turn on them. At the time, neighbors couldn't believe that an 11-year-old could have killed someone and then be killed himself.
He was a sweet little kid. He wasn't violent, and he wasn't bad. The way they talking about now, that's not true.
It was a story that made headlines across the country 15 years ago. It was on the cover of Time magazine. The article was entitled, "There Are No Children Here." At the time, G. Neri was teaching art and literature workshops at a South Central L.A. middle school. That's when he heard the story.
I was on a break and I opened up a newspaper, and there was this story about this 11-year-old boy who was barely 5 feet tall. In his effort to try to impress the local gang, got involved in a kind of drive-by gone bad, accidentally killing a 14-year-old girl who he knew growing up. And when I went back to the students I was working with and we started to talk about this story, it provoked some really strong reactions from the kids, because at that time there was a gang war going on, and more than a couple of times I had heard these announcements come over the PA system about a memorial service for a student who had been killed, an innocent bystander in this gang war. And a lot of these kids I was dealing with were like the troubled kids. They had their own experiences with gangs. They had brothers or fathers who had been involved with gangs, who may be in prison. So they had very strong feelings about Yummy. Some felt that he was just a straight-up thug who got what he deserved. Others felt that he was just as much a victim as the girl that he accidentally killed, Siobhan Dean. As the story played itself out, there were a lot of different reactions. The media portrayed him as one way, the politicians talked about him one way, people in the neighborhood saw like the whole gamut, depending on their own personal experiences with this kid. And so I was drawn by, that this little kid could be seen in so many ways, and that kind of became the thing that I couldn't get out of my head. Yummy became kind of this poster child for everything that was wrong in the inner city.
G. Neri decided to do something to reach the kids that he was seeing every day. He wanted to tell Yummy's story, but how?
You would be so depressed by the story at the end, and so I struggled for many years to try to figure out what was the point of telling the story, because there were a million Yummies out there. Suddenly, in working with these kids, I realized the people that needed to hear this story, to see this story, were these middle grade schools, young boys from 8 to 13, because those are the ages where kids were actually starting to get involved with gangs. But Yummy's story, in and of itself, without any preaching or moralizing, was so powerful and so compelling that I felt that if I could find a way to communicate it to them simply, that it would put another voice in their head, plant a seed of doubt that when they found themselves in these situations, it would just give them another thing to think about, And once I stumbled upon the idea to tell it through graphic novel format, then it just kind of, everything clicked, and we were off and running.
As the search for Yummy continued, Things started to heat up. The black disciples were getting tired of dealing with all the attention. So Yummy set out on his own. But with the police cracking down and his own gang having second thoughts, Yummy had nowhere to go.
There's something about graphic novels that, because the comic kind of disarms you, it's not so threatening, and you can kind of gradually get into this world. And then almost these ideas are almost twice as powerful, I think, because if you're watching a movie and you know it's a serious movie about war, you're kind of set for it. But if you open a graphic novel about war, it takes you to a different place. So I think the possibilities can be much more powerful in an odd way. Sometimes I go into these classrooms and in the back there's usually some kid who doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to listen to me. And he's kind of off in his own world, and this kid will pick up a copy of the book with no intention of reading it, but just kind of open it up, and 10 minutes later I notice they're still looking at it, and 20 minutes later I notice they're like actually reading it. And afterwards I will hear from the teacher, it's like, you know, that kid back there, he's never read a book before, and he just read your book. I always thought from the beginning, since the voices are not grammatically correct, you know, they're not told in proper English, that somebody would have a problem with it.
Yo, what gang you in? I ain't in no gang. Then you won't run. My mama always said bad things happen to bad people. I knew one day Yummy'd really mess up. That day came when Yummy saw some of his so-called rivals playing football.
You know, but it's been quite the opposite, because they all deal with kids like this, and they all are frustrated at not having material that can connect with these kids. And so when they see my books, they really just grab onto it. And, you know, when they started asking for more, then I knew I was onto something.
All I knew was I didn't want me or my brother to end up like Yummy. When Mama pushed me up to the coffin, I was afraid of falling in. I looked Yummy straight in his face. He sure looked small. Didn't look like no gangster or no killer to me. Just looked like a little kid sleeping. I wondered if he'd go to heaven or hell. Bye, Yummy.
You know, this story took me 15 years to bring out, you know, but it's actually more timely now than ever. You know, I don't expect this book to change the world, but if it can give some hope somewhere, then it's a positive thing.
I don't know which was worse, the way Yummy lived or the way he died. But if we could live through all this craziness and stay a family, maybe that's worth fighting for.
They called him Little Yummy cause he liked to eat candy. He lived with his granny, but the streets was his family. By him being young, he was easy to control. He ain't know any better, so he did what he was told. Like drive bys, walk up to a guy, ask him what he claiming, wrong answer and he died. And Shorty was only 11, but he posted up on 107. Yeah, a story about a young boy.
G. Neri's graphic novel is called Yummy, The Last Days of a Southside Shorty. Thanks to Mr. Leo for his help with the reading. You can learn more about G. Neri's book Yummy on our website, and we're at thestory.org.